Montana Territory. Spring of 1880. The wind off the Gallatin Range carried the scent of thawing pine and dusted snow as the stagecoach rattled into the town of Three Forks, its wheels spitting mud from the newly melted trail. Keira Dawnell stepped down from the coach with her hands clenched tight around the handle of her carpet bag, though it was near empty. She had nothing but one spare dress, a letter folded 4 times from a man she had never met, and a heart cracked clean down the middle. Her boots were secondhand and too tight, and her coat barely held out the wind. Still, she stood straight. She had not come all this way from Ohio to collapse on the wooden sidewalk. Her eyes scanned the quiet street. No sign of a man with a red kerchief and bay horse, as the letter had promised. Her jaw tightened. She had no money left for a return fare. No family left to send for. She was 23 and entirely alone in a land that felt too wide. A man on horseback slowed as he approached the coach, his dark hair brushing his collar, his hat tugged low. He was not the man from the letter. He dismounted without a word, tying off his horse before lifting a crate from the back of a wagon across the way. Keira turned away, her pride scraping raw. She would wait. Maybe the man was just late. An hour passed. Then another. The coach left. Evening pressed in. "Excuse me," she said, finally stepping forward toward the man with the horse. "Do you know where I might find a Mr. Elton Reeves?" The man looked up. His eyes were a steady brown, quiet but sharp. He was handsome in that effortless way cowboys often were, all sun and earth and strength. "Reeves's place burned down 2 weeks ago," he said. "He left town, headed west. Did not say if he was coming back." Keira's breath caught. But she opened the letter in her hand, the only thing she had clung to for months. "He sent for me. I was to be his wife." The man stepped closer, his face unreadable. "You came all this way to marry him?" "I had no choice," she said, voice low. "I have nothing else. No one." The wind tugged her bonnet strings. "Would you happen to know where I might find work?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Name's Zeke Granger. I run cattle northwest of here. I could use help with the house. Cookin', laundry, some repairs. It is not charity. You would earn your keep." She blinked once. "I do not take handouts." "Good," he said and nodded. "You will ride back with me in the morning." Zeke's ranch sat at the edge of the hills, some 2 hours out by horse. The ride the next morning was quiet but not unfriendly. He did not talk much, which suited her fine. She was used to silence. His home was modest, 1-story, wide porch, a barn in need of repair. But it was warm and smelled like pine smoke. She noticed a wooden carving of a horse on the mantel, rough but careful. There was no woman's touch anywhere. "You live alone?" she asked that evening after supper, her sleeves rolled up as she dried the dishes. He nodded. "My folks died when I was 15. I took over the place. Been on my own since." "And you never married?" "No." She nodded, glancing down at the plate in her hands. Weeks passed. Snow melted. The land bloomed in quiet color. Keira kept busy mending curtains, baking bread, scrubbing the porch. She learned the rhythm of Zeke's days, the way he always brought in wood before supper, the way he checked on the pregnant mare first thing each morning. One day, he handed her a book he had picked up in town. "Thought you might like it." She traced the worn edge of the cover. It was a novel, simple but kind. She held it close that night in bed, the first gift she had received in years. One evening, as she stood on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills, he stepped up beside her. "You miss home?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. There was never much of a home to miss. He looked at her then, a long look that made her heart stir. "You came here with nothing," he said, voice low. "But I look at you and you are already everything." Her breath caught. "I mean that," he said, eyes steady on hers. "You fix what is broken. You make things warm. I do not know what this place was before you, but I know what it is now. She swallowed hard.
Zeke.
I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give, he said. But I want you to know, you are not just passing through here. Not to me. She stepped closer. Her hand brushed his. He did not pull away. I never thought I would belong anywhere, she whispered.
You do now, he said.
Their fingers laced together, slow and certain. Spring deepened. The mare gave birth. Keira helped deliver the foal, her hands slick with sweat and straw.
Zeke stood beside her the whole time.
Later, once the foal stood on wobbly legs, he turned to her with a grin that reached all the way to his eyes. You did good, Keira. So did you. They stood there, arms brushing, a silence full of something warm and blooming. That night, as the wind rustled the pines, Zeke knocked once on her doorframe. I want to build a life with you, he said simply. Not out of obligation. Because I have come to care for you. She stepped to him, her eyes shining. I want that too. He reached for her hand, held it against his chest. Then we will begin tomorrow. The first nail she drove into the new chicken coop split the board clean through, and Keira muttered under her breath, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with the back of her wrist. Zeke, crouched nearby fitting hinges onto the coop door, looked up at the sound. You're hitting too close to the edge, he said, not unkindly. She gave a frustrated exhale. I built shelves back in Ohio with my uncle. Thought I remembered more than I do. Zeke stood and walked over, took the hammer gently from her hand. You remember enough. Just need to feel the wood more than fight it. He guided her hand to a new plank, letting her grip the hammer again while he steadied the board. Try here. Let the weight do most of the work. She struck slower this time. The nails sunk straight and sure. There, he said. That's the sound you want. She looked up at him. You always this patient? Only when it matters. The day traced on in the warmth of late April. They worked until the sun dipped low enough to throw long shadows on the fields, until the chickens nosed around their new shelter and the coop stood square and sturdy. Inside, Keira washed her hands at the basin while Zeke lit the lantern. She caught sight of herself in the mirror above the washstand, cheeks flushed, hair coming loose, dirt under her nails, but there was something steadier in her gaze than there had been when she'd first stepped off that coach. Zeke set 2 bowls of stew on the table, then sat across from her. Town fairs at the end of the month. Folks bring quilts, pies, animals. There's music some years, if the fiddlers show. She tilted her head. You planning to go? I usually don't. But I reckon this year's different. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she dipped her spoon and took a bite of the stew. It was rich with onion and sage. I haven't danced since I was 16, she said quietly. There wasn't much joy after my mother passed. He didn't touch his spoon. I'd like to see you dance. Her hand curled around the bowl. Maybe I'd like that too. The next morning, Zeke rode out early to check fence posts along the northern ridge. Keira stayed behind, scrubbing the hearth and sorting linens. Around midday, she opened the trunk at the foot of the bed his mother's, from the initials carved into the brass latch, and found a bundle of calico wrapped in tissue. A dress, faded but finely made. That evening, when Zeke returned with dust on his boots and hay in his cuffs, he found her stitching along the hem of the calico dress by lamplight.
He leaned in the doorway.
That was hers. I can mend it, Keira said. With some care, it'll hold together for a long while yet. Seems right you'd wear it, he said after a moment. She'd have liked you. Keira looked up. You speak of her often? Not much. But I remember how she kept a garden even when the ground fought back. Stubborn like that. Keira smiled softly. That sort of stubborn runs in the family. He didn't deny it. Just stepped forward, set a parcel wrapped in brown paper on the table. Got you something in town. It's no grand thing. She opened it carefully. Inside was a comb of carved bone, the edges shaped like leaves. There was a woman selling them by the mercantile, he said. Said her husband carved them, when the weather kept him in. Keira turned it over in her hand. It's beautiful. He shrugged. Figured you might like something your own. She stood, walked to him, and reached up, letting her fingers brush his collar as she rested her forehead lightly against his chest. I have never known a man to be this kind without wanting something first, she said. His hand came to her back, firm and steady. I want you, he said, but not in ways that would ever take from you. She tilted her face up. Then you can have me. When I'm ready, I'll come to you clear-eyed. His thumb traced the line of her spine. I'll wait for that day. Outside, the wind slipped through the grass, gentle and low, like something learning the shape of a new season. Inside, she stood in the quiet circle of his arms, already knowing she'd found the place where she would stay. By the time the fair came, the valley had slipped fully into green. The cottonwoods along the river showed their silver undersides in the breeze, and wild buttercups dotted the pastures. Keira stood barefoot on the porch stoop that morning, shaking out the calico dress she had finished hemming just days before. Her hands weren't trembling, not exactly, but they hovered a little too long over each button. Zeke came around from the barn, wiping his palms on his trousers. Horse is saddled. We can leave when you're ready. She didn't turn. I've never worn anything this fine outside of church. He leaned against the post beside her. You wear it like it's yours. She smoothed the skirt down over her hips. It's too fine for mucking stalls, that's certain. Then I'll make sure today doesn't call for any. They rode into town at a quiet pace, the wagon creaking under jars of pickled beets, a small sack of flour to trade, and a bundle of dried mint leaves Keira had tucked into a tin with a strip of ribbon. The town square, normally dusty and half-silent, buzzed with color and sound laughter, wagon wheels crunching gravel, the thin whine of a fiddle being tuned somewhere behind the general store. Zeke helped her down from the wagon bed, his hand steady on her waist. You want to walk or eat first? I'd like to see the quilts. They moved among the stalls, Keira's eyes lingering on patchwork sewn from flour sacks and old gingham dresses. One square in particular caught her attention, deep indigo shapes stitched in the likeness of trees, with a border of stars. Those are Dakota stars, she said softly, almost to herself. You know the pattern? My mother traded bread loaves for sewing lessons from a half-Lakota woman outside Chillicothe. She taught me how to stitch them once. Zeke ran a finger lightly across the edge of the quilt. You ever think of sewing one again? I would, if I had enough scraps. He didn't say anything, but later, when she returned from buying a tin of lye soap, she found a small bundle of cloth tucked into the wagon, each piece carefully folded old shirts, faded muslin, and one square of blue with specks like pollen. She ran her thumb across it and said nothing, but her chest ached in a way that felt strangely clean. By early afternoon, the music began. Two fiddlers and a young boy with a dulcimer set up beneath an elm tree, and couples began to gather in a wide circle. Keira stood at the edge, hands clasped in front of her, eyes half lowered. You said you hadn't danced in years, Zeke said beside her. I didn't say I forgot how. He offered his hand. Then show me. She took it, heart-thudding. The music started a reel, quick and bright, and Zeke's steps were sure but unpolished. He watched her feet, then her face, as if trying to match both. She laughed once, low in her throat. He grinned, ears pink, and adjusted his pace. You're not half bad, she said. I watch cattle move all day. You learn rhythm one way or another. The song ended, and a slow waltz began. Fewer couples stayed for this one.
Zeke didn't ask.
He just stepped closer, his hand resting light on her waist, the other holding hers with the same care he used when carrying eggs from the coop. She looked up at him. I used to think quiet men didn't feel things. He met her gaze. I used to think women who'd lost everything would be too guarded to love again. Her breath caught. And now I know better. When the sun slipped behind the grain elevator, they left the fairgrounds with the last of the wagons. Keira leaned back against the seat, the bundle of cloths in her lap, her hand resting close to his, but not yet touching. Halfway home, she spoke. You meant it, didn't you? When you said I wasn't passing through. He didn't look at her, just tilted his head toward the horizon. The land stays. So do the people that belong to it. And you think I belong now? I think you always did. Just needed somewhere to land. Her hand found his then, warm from the sun and calloused from the day. She laced her fingers through his without hesitation. I'm ready now, she said, clear-eyed. Zeke slowed the wagon, turned to her fully. You sure? I've never been more. He leaned in, his kiss slow, grounded, tasting of dust and salt and the long road that had brought them both to this place. When they parted, her forehead rested against his. I want to build it with you, she whispered. The life, the quilt, all of it. Zeke exhaled, voice low and certain. Then we'll start tonight. The day after the fair, the sky hung low and pale, the kind of morning where sound carried farther than it should. Dew clung to the fence rails, and the pasture grass whispered beneath the cows' slow steps. Keira rose before first light, the hem of her nightdress brushing the floorboards as she moved through the house barefoot, her breath briefly clouding the window pane as she looked out toward the barn. Zeke was already gone from the bed. She followed the scent of damp leather and ash outside, where he stood knee-deep in the creek below the slope, a half-mended line of fencing coiled beside him and a coil of wire balanced on his shoulder. You're out early, she called softly, stepping down the hill, her boots dampening in the tall grass. Wire snapped clean in the night, he said without looking up, twisting it tight around a post. Could have let it be, but I don't sleep easy when the herd's loose. She crouched beside him on the bank. You always take the hard road? He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth tugging just slightly. Only when it leads somewhere worth going. She gathered the end of a post that had rolled partway into the water and held it steady as he worked. The sun crept higher by the time they finished, and when they stood, wet to the knees and breathless, she leaned her forehead briefly against his shoulder. I want to ask you something, she said, but I don't want it to come out wrong. He waited. I'd like to keep teaching, she said, voice low. Reading, numbers, maybe sewing for the younger girls. There's barely a school in town, and I could do it here, once a week maybe. Zeke's brow furrowed, not in disapproval, but thought. You'd bring them here? If their parents allow.
Just for a few hours at a time.
I'd only do it if it didn't pull from the ranch. He wiped a hand down his jaw, nodding slowly. You think you could manage that, and everything else? I've managed worse. You've never asked for permission before. I'm not asking now. I'm telling the man I love what I plan to do, so he knows what kind of woman he married. Zeke's face shifted, something quiet settling behind his eyes. You haven't said it before, he said after a beat. That you love me. I didn't need to. You already knew. He stepped forward, took her face in both hands, thumbs brushing the hollow just beneath her cheekbones. I did, he said. But hearing it still feels like rain after a long dry season. She leaned into him, her lips brushing his in the hush between pasture wind and creek water. Later that week, she rode into town with a crate of preserves and a hand-pen notice offering free lessons for children willing to learn. She tacked it to the post outside the mercantile, aware of eyes watching from across the street. A woman with a red shawl and a boy on her hip paused nearby. You're the bride that came for Reeves, the woman said, more observation than question. I came for future, Keira answered, not unkindly. The woman shifted the boy higher on her hip. Well, you found it. That man of yours looks at you like you hung the stars. Keira gave a small nod. He makes me feel like I could. By the following Thursday, 3 children arrived by wagon and 1 on foot, their mothers lingering near the porch while Keira laid out slates and chalk. The barn cat slunk between ankles, and Zeke, hammering shingles onto the tool shed, kept one eye on the gathering. When the lesson ended, and the children left with ears red from the wind and hands smudged with charcoal, Keira stood on the porch beside him, brushing dust from her apron. "They listened better than I expected," she said. "They'll come back." "You sound certain." "Because you gave them something their parents couldn't." She turned to him. "And what did I give you, Zeke?" He didn't answer right away. Then he looked at her, steady and sure. "A reason to build things I used to let fall apart." That night, she lay curled against him, her breath soft against the line of his neck. He ran a hand through her hair, slow and absent, like he was still memorizing her. "You ever think about having a child?" he asked. She didn't move for a long moment. Then, quietly, "I used to be afraid I wouldn't know how. And now, I think if they had your hands and your steadiness, I'd find my way." Zeke pressed a kiss into her hair. "Then let's make something new together," he said. "Something that carries both of us forward." She reached for his hand beneath the quilt, their fingers tingling. "We already have," she whispered. "But I'd like to see who else we can become." June brought a stretch of dry warmth that softened the last of the creek mud and coaxed the peach tree near the barn into early bloom. Keira stood barefoot in the garden rows that morning, pressing seeds into the turned soil with the pad of her thumb. She'd sketched the layout herself: corn against the fence, beans near the trellis, squash in the corner where the sun touched longest, and Zeke had cut the cedar stakes to mark each row. The dirt clung beneath her nails, but she worked slow and content, humming a tune she half remembered from childhood. A shadow crossed the ground beside her. "You missed one," Zeke said, crouching to press a seed beside her boot. "Right there. I was saving that for you." He straightened, brushing his palms on his trousers, then looked out toward the pasture. "I got a letter from the county office. They've approved the land grant extension. I can fence the east slope now." She leaned on the hoe handle. "You'll need more hands for that. I've been thinking about taking on a boy or 2 from town. Older ones. Teach 'em the work, pay 'em fair. You'd make a good teacher." He gave a short nod. "If I'm half as patient as you are with those little ones, they'll turn out fine." The wind stirred through the grass, tugging the hem of her skirt. She angled her face up toward him. "I've been late," she said. He blinked. "How late?" 3 weeks. Zeke's eyes didn't widen or darken. He simply stepped forward, placed his hand low and careful against her belly. "Are you sure?" "I am." He let out a breath and held it for a second. "You afraid?" "I was," she said. "But I'm not now." He leaned down and kissed her, slow and certain, right there with the sun on her back and the scent of turned earth rising around them. That evening, she stitched by the fire while he sharpened the edge of a draw knife. The house had grown fuller, more tools by the door, more dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a second chair carved from pine that he'd made for her, without saying a word. She could smell beans cooking down with salt pork in the pot, and the air inside felt like something lived in, like a place that held stories now. "I've been thinking about the bedroom," Zeke said, not looking up from the blade. "We could build a cradle. I've got leftover walnut boards in the loft." She didn't pause her sewing. "I think you've already pictured it." "I have." She looked over and met his gaze. "Then let's build it. Together." He nodded once, then rose, set the tool aside, and came to kneel beside her chair. "I don't know what kind of father I'll be. You'll be steady. You'll listen. That's more than most." He took her hand and pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist. "You've given me more than I ever thought I'd have. You gave me a place to land." They sat that way until the fire burned low. Weeks passed. The garden sprouted thick with green. The children came each Thursday for lessons, and Zeke began work on the cradle. Keira's waist thickened gently, her gait slowing and small, almost imperceptible ways.
She didn't complain.
When her back ached, she leaned against him at night, and he'd rub slow circles with his palm until she fell asleep. One Sunday morning, she brought a bolt of muslin out from the chest at the foot of the bed. "For the baby's gown," she said, "and I'll quilt something small. A star piece." He rested his chin on her shoulder, arms around her middle. "What color?" "Sky blue. To match the piece you gave me." He hummed low in his throat. They named the child before he came Nathaniel if a boy, Margaret if a girl. Keira didn't believe in waiting to love something until it arrived. In early November, with frost clinging to the porch rails, Margaret was born just before dawn. Zeke held her as if she were made of breath and light, his large hands trembling for the first time in years. Keira, worn through but smiling, watched from the bed as he traced a finger down their daughter's cheek. "She has your eyes," he whispered. "She has your quiet," she answered. They raised her in the rhythm of the land's slow mornings, warm bread, a cradle that rocked with the wind against the walls. Keira taught her letters before she could walk. Zeke carried her in a sling while he checked fence lines. The town children brought her wildflowers when they came for lessons, and she grew up knowing the sound of fiddle strings and the scent of saddle soap. When Margaret turned 4, Zeke built her a small stool beside the hearth, carved with pine cones and willow leaves. She sat there every evening while Keira read aloud by lamplight, her head resting against her mother's knee. On the first morning of spring, Zeke brought Keira a single bloom from the peach tree and tucked it behind her ear. "You've made this place more than I ever hoped," he said. She looked out at the land, the garden ready to turn, the barn freshly painted, the hills gold with morning light. "We made it," she said. "Together." He kissed her then, with the same surety as their first, and the same promise. And in that quiet house on the edge of the Gallatin Hills, with a child growing strong and the land blooming all around them, they lived their days with steady hands, full hearts, and a love that held fast through every season.